Today's show is brought to you by The Voice That Is. Doug White is the owner of this award-winning dealership that has assembled a refined selection of elite brands featuring Tidal Audio, Doman Audio, Siltec cables, Equitech balanced power, and more. Providing personalized service, The Voice That Is carefully selected brands are from the finest companies in the world, each of which at the top of their category and represents exceptional high quality, performance, and above all, musicality. Check out the full list of all of Doug's world-class products at www.thevoicethatis.com. There you are, friends, and here I am, your host, Brian Hunter, and you have reached the Occasional Podcast, Season 9, Episode 14, Captial Audiofest 2023. In this episode, we are joined by three other PTA staff writers who helped cover the Captial Audiofest show, Graig, Marc, and Grover. I do apologize a little bit for the audio quality. We had some issues as we do in live situations. There's a little bit of background noise, so please bear with us. But of course, as you guys know, we are in the holiday season, and part of that is our PTA Black Friday post that went up. So we have all the deals collected on a single page. You can scroll through them, all the good audiophile brands, all kinds of fun stuff. Don't forget, guys, this year, crazy thing. If you love the Eames Lounger, it's actually 25% off direct from Herman Miller with free shipping, which is usually, it's 20% around Black Friday, so they actually upped it 5%. But be forewarned, it's obviously a super expensive chair, and they kind of raised the prices like 5%, so it might just equal out to last year. But again, if you're a fan of this designer Eames Lounger chair that is very popular with audiophiles, it is one of the sale items, so you can check that out. But in case you were wondering, of all the deals we list, who usually walks away victorious? And you're not going to believe this, it's kind of the same every year. Wharfdale speakers. People love them. I think they find them a great value. I mean, at least from the data, it shows there's a definite hunger for them. So if you want to look at what everyone else is looking at, check out the Wharfdale speaker special on that page, because they have a lot of stuff going on, and they have a bunch of different things. It includes the Linton and the Heritage series. There's two models from the Heritage series that kind of have a very fun vintage profile that I like. So that's just something to check out if you got the time, if you're in the shopping mood. Now, as I say, on with the show. Here we go. Live from Captial Audiofest 2023 in DC. Take it away, guys. Today's episode of the Occasional Podcast is sponsored by Inuos. Inuos engineers innovative, artful, HiFi products that deliver unexpected warmth and accuracy. Products that unleash the full potential of digital music playback. Going beyond simple ones and zeros, Inuos products elevate music enjoyment by offering true audiophile performance from your digital music library or HiFi streaming service. Find an Inuos dealer near you to hear the difference. Today's episode of the Occasional Podcast is sponsored by Purist Audio Design. Quality audio deserves quality sound, like the purest of diamonds. Purist Audio Design, one of the originals and high-end, just launched their Diamond Revision. With improved metallurgy, flexibility, and enhanced shielding to protect your system from RFI, EMI, interference from noisy wireless devices, the Diamond Revision, just like all of Purist cables, is made right here in the US of A. For over 35 years, Purist Audio Design has passionately made high-end, handcrafted audio cables designed specifically for the needs of your system. They list their specs, such as resistance and shield quality, and you can find them at PuristAudioDesign.com. Purist Audio Design is veteran-owned and available worldwide. Gents, Yeah, this is very exciting for me. I'm very, very excited to meet up with you guys. This is a new kind of conglomeration of the mind meld of the PTA crew. Everybody, want to just go around and introduce yourself real quick so you know the voice with the name?
Greg Neville.
Grover Neville.
Marc Smazik.
Brian Hunter. And we are at Captial Audiofest today, and it's Saturday, and we're in the main room, so if you hear a little bit of background noise, that's what you're hearing, the din of the atrium area.
Live recording audience.
Yeah, it's been really interesting.
In the field.
Buzzy.
Yeah. How's the vibe been for you so far, Grover? Been good?
It's cozy. I think Captial Audiofest is always, it's like cozier, than other shows. It's also been cool because I feel like there's a lot of people who I don't see here normally that have shown up, like European brands or like Asian brands that I haven't seen in the States. And it's just nice also to see folks and get together. There was maybe, I don't know if you felt this, but I feel like was more excitement with this show. Like people were like ready to like, all right, let's do Captial Audiofest. There's like things to be excited about. There's a more energy. Sometimes this show is like, okay, time to do Captial again. It's going to be like the same. We had more different brands, brands that came showed different stuff.
I think the big news, too, is that there's a lot. It's bigger than the last time I remember. I think I've heard 135, I've heard 150. So it's just bigger venues, just like you said, more international. We always talk about the crowds. I think for me, the crowds aren't necessarily the youngest, but they're a good mix. It's not like I'm like, whoa, I just got ran over by a toddler.
I saw more families than I've seen in the past.
Well, and there's good diversity too. I mean, I saw a number of people that were like older women and people that were kind of carting around in little wheelchairs and stuff like that, and just a nice healthy mix that it is good to see that there's a lot of diversity in HiFi.
Yeah. I've run into more sort of 30 to 40-year-olds at this show than usual, and it's been really pleasant.
A missing demographic, too. 30 to 40s. Unusually, there's like a dip there, I think.
The guys who cleaned out the rooms told me 103 hotel rooms had their furniture removed.
And compared to when I was here last, it must have been 5 years ago, that was like a show that you could manage with one person. Like, you did the thing. And I love those shows, to be honest. Like, you got one day or like a couple of hours and you're through every room. It's not like that. It's just been kind of a big thing to tackle, but I think that we got a pretty good handle on it. But yeah, good in the sense that it's a lot of rooms. It just creates a little bit more work for us, but like good sounds. Greg, what did you kind of hit the sounds? How are the rooms?
I think that the rooms that sound good sound very good. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Or will we?
Hotel rooms are always really tough, and it doesn't really necessarily tell you how good something sounds, but if you walk into a room and you like the sound and it does sound good, then you know that there's some potential there that is worth a kind of a deeper dive. Even some of the rooms that maybe didn't sound as great, I at least try to listen for what is it that this equipment's doing that's special. And as long as there's something that's special and interesting kind of going on, then it's like, okay, we can maybe get a more optimized environment for these and give them another shake.
I think that's a big part of doing these show coverages is you end up having to listen around the room, right? You're saying, oh, is that honking I heard? Is that a room thing or is that a part of the system? And so we try to get this stuff and bring it back with us to get it into a controlled space.
It's also, a lot of people have to share rooms, whether it's like a manufacturer and a dealer sharing a room, or whether it's two manufacturers working together, or it's maybe a distributor and a dealer working a room together, right? So you have to make certain concessions. And honestly, setting up a room at shows, it's like herding cats with a rake. It's like, this is challenging, right?
Well, and that's the interesting thing. Marc, I know you've set up rooms. Grover set up rooms. I've set up rooms. Brian, I don't know if you've done that. I don't do shit. That's excellent. But yeah, trying to get a room to sound good is just a hair-pulling experience. Yeah. Sometimes that first day it sounds terrible, and by the time Saturday night rolls around, everything's kind of firing the way it should.
And if you get 4 or 5 people in there and everybody's name is on their own piece of equipment, there's a lot of egos and personalities to manage, and yeah, it can be quite the handful.
I'm always the most impressed by people who get consistent rooms that are like, oh, the sound is like even throughout most of the room. There's not any weird like spots, so like everybody when they walk in they get a good experience from the beginning, right? Rooms that consistently from like Friday through to Sunday get decent sound, are playing like consistent decent music. Like it's hard. It's really hard to do it and to achieve a high level of consistency. So it's like you're not always gonna have perfect imaging or perfect this or whatever, but if you can try to get a consistent experience, and then the rooms, like, they get hot by the end of the day because there's lots of bodies, right?
And some of them with tubes get hot.
And some of them with tubes get toasty, right? So it's like just trying to get through it and get consistent. I have a lot of sympathy for the people who have to do the setup because in the room at the end of the day, like, oh man, it's toasty in here. I'm worn out.
And they don't always want to run the AC because the AC can be noisy and all that.
It's quite noisy, yeah. So they're like sweating at the end of the day. They've eaten like 4 French fries, and they have to go back and do it the next day. I'm like, respect.
You're paying off the hotel to be able to run the air conditioner all night down to 50 degrees and hope it sticks around all day.
Speaking of 30 to 40-year-olds, though, I did run into a 30 to 40-year-old that this was his first show. And I was like, yes, the guy, he was a really cool gentleman. He had great taste in music, a bonus, right? And so he kind of was asking me for tips about what's my first audio show, what would you give a first timer a tip? And I kind of want to go around the horn here, as they say. Greg, do you have any tips for first timers?
Yeah, I think so. This is my first time at Capitol. I've been to Exponus several times, and I think that the important thing is if you try to go to every single room to hear everything that you possibly can, you're going to have a miserable experience. You need to pick out a couple of things that you really want to hear and have a little bit of focus, and then just hit those rooms. And then if you have time for other rooms, just whatever looks interesting, or you walk past a room that sounds like it has cool music or it has good sound, then you can poke your head in. And so you won't see everything there is to see. But quite honestly, as a first-time showgoer, are you going to remember every brand of everything that you've heard at a show? It's just too much.
I'm going to make it even simpler. Find a room that you think is cool, where the people are nice, and make some friends. Because here's the thing. As a first, we can be like, oh, go to these shows, and here's the strategy for the room and all that sort of stuff. But we're kind of looking almost more like from an experienced person or like a press person's viewpoint, right? Or like an industry person's viewpoint. As like a really brand new person. Marc Smazik and I go to a lot of conventions that are like con scenes, like Comic-Con type scenes. And what I do when I go to a new convention is I used to try and go to everything and see everything. It was so stressful.
It's a fool's errand.
It's not going to happen, right? You're just going to be stressed out. You're going to be constipated by the end. It's not going to work out. And so what I do instead is like find a seminar or a room that's cool, make some friends, and the friends will tell you, hey, this is the thing I like to go to, or here's the thing that you should check this out. I think that'd be cool. And before you know it, you're like, well, I was never into like Legend of Zelda costuming, and now I am. Like, I was never into Magico speakers, but then I met some people who were in the MSB room, and they told me to go check out the Magicos, and I thought those were cool. And now, because I'm talking to the Magico people, they're like, hey, you should go down the street and check out the people who make, like transparent cables. And now you're listening, you're like, oh, the guys from Transparent are cool. Like, make friends, learn people, like, because this is a cottage industry, right? It's a small industry where people know each other, and like everyone, it's very subjective, right? So make friends and see what's cool, and have them point you in directions and get to know. I wouldn't go wide but shallow on my first trip. I would try to get a little bit deep with a smaller number of people on my first trip, just to offer a different opinion. We
sort of do a flavor of that ourselves, at least. I know every time we run into each other in the halls, we'll be like, where'd you go? Did you see something cool? To a separate, or it's to a different extent, because we go very shallow and wide, but even the reviewers talk to each other, say, oh man, I heard this thing over here and it was really cool, you should go check it out, and we send each other that way. It's the brain trust, right? Like, we have a collective brain trust that's stronger together.
Yeah, my advice was, no matter what happens, no matter what your dietary restrictions might be, never use a showroom bathroom for number 2.
I'm allergic to silver cables. No, I'm kidding. Those are for eating.
Yeah, because and as soon as I had said this tip, someone came up to me later and said, yeah, I heard your tip, and guess what? 8th floor, halfway through the second day, someone dropped a bomb in there and smoked the whole hall out. Because what happens is they might open the window or something, and it blows it all out into the hallway. And next thing you know, it's like a national disaster. Like, the show, I'll never forget, like, the show 2018. No, someone destroyed a floor, and it was like in there forever, and I just couldn't.
I'll take that one step further. Just don't touch your face. Period. All weekend. Everybody touches the door handles. Everybody touches the doors. Just don't touch your face.
No finger food.
At the same time I was talking to that, another person came up to this speaker designer, and then we had kind of a serious moment where this guy said, like, hey, man, I want you to know that you just brought like a lot of real joy to my life. And I was like, well, this is like so serious. Like I was just standing there next to him. I'm like, I'm in like seeing this kind of whatever moment. This guy had a prepared thing he wanted to say to this person who he really admired, and he just makes speakers, but at the same time, that to me encapsulated like the best parts of kind of what we do here and what's to be had at these shows for first timers too. It's like if you start to admire something from afar, when you get to see it up close right away. I mean, this guy was like prepared. He had a little speech to say, and I was like, dude, that is like badass, because I think that for all of us, maybe we get caught up in the hubbub, or we do it so often and we forget kind of why maybe we were originally here. At least for me, I can only speak for myself, is that there was a sense of awe to the industry as a whole. And so did you guys catch any fun moments? Like what have been your like little interesting, the best?
Oh, we had a guy come into a room I was in, right, and talk about how he had an older pair of speakers from a manufacturer, and he was looking at one of the newer pairs, and he said, oh, maybe I can hawk my older ones online and, upgrade to something new. And he's talking to the guy whose name is on the speaker. And he's like, oh, I didn't get your name. What was your name? And he introduced himself. And the guy's his face turned absolutely white. He's like, oh, just forget everything I said. And he just kind of like slinked back into the room.
Well, I mean, that is one interesting thing, is that a good number of the manufacturers here are very passionate about what it is that they do. And so, especially as a press person, they'll talk to potential customers or just, whoever, and be very passionate. But especially, I think, for the press people, they really get excited to talk to us about what they're doing, what's coming up. They're going to nerd out on us and just go as deep into the weeds of tech stuff that they've done. And, you kind of nod your head and like, I don't know what you're talking about. You go, because this is your thing. So that part is cool to see, manufacturers are really excited about what they're doing. And the other thing is that one of the guys I was talking to, he said, this show is really kind of cool compared to the other shows that I go to, in that I have seen more people coming in that are more interested in the music that's playing, and they're sitting down and listening and not getting all tweaked out and nerdy about the gear. Like, how much does this cost? And what's the distortion measurements on this thing? And it's just like, oh, wow, that's a great track. It sounds great. I really like it. What was that?
I have a moment. I am friends with Leland from Lone Mountain, who's the ATC distributor for North America. And I saw what, I don't know, to me was kind of a tender moment. There was a dad who walked in with his two little girls. One of them couldn't have been more than maybe 3 or 4, and the other one was maybe 4 or 5. I mean, young. And Leland said, hey, come on in, guys. And the dad was looking around a little. He said, girls, would you like to take a seat in the 2 prime listening spot seats? And he knelt down, and he looked him in the eye, and he said, girls, there's a lot of expensive equipment in this room, so I'd like to request that we have some ground rules. We're not going to touch anything. Is that okay? And they nodded their heads. He said, we play music here, and, you sit and you can listen to the music, and if you like the way it sounds, maybe you sit and you listen a little more. Does that sound interesting? And they're like, sure, we'll give it a try. Is there something you girls would like to hear? Like, what do you like to listen to? And they were a little shy at first. He said, do you like Frozen? And they went, yeah, we love Frozen. I said, okay. So he goes over and cues up some Frozen. And they blasted some Frozen in the ATC room. And I poked my head. I was like, dude, rock on. That's like so awesome. And they were sitting there, and the little girls like lit up. They were like, whoa, we haven't heard it like this
This
before.
is not an Alexa.
And I came back like 15 minutes there, and they were still sitting like riveted, leaning forward, body language very engaged. Like they were in it. And their dad was obviously, he was like, oh, this is super cool. And everyone's like, why is the ATC room blasting Frozen? To me, that was a really tender moment. That was a father speaking to other children and like treating them the same as we treat anyone else who comes in the room.
And that's how we get new people into the industry.
Exactly.
I mean, it's a kind of a homegrown industry in a lot of ways.
It was very welcoming. I thought that was really sweet to see. Plus, it was kind of nice just to hear, like, I don't know, when's the last time you heard anyone play, like, some Disney on... Oh. It sounded okay.
MBL used to play Under the Sea.
What? How did I miss that?
And on the big
what?
360 towers, I was in there, I'm like, dude, nice track. It sounded really good.
It sounds good.
Yeah.
That does sound good. We're giving Smazzic ideas.
I was like, dude, everybody jumped at that one.
Forget Chocolate Chip Trip.
Yeah,
we're playing Under the Sea. It's better. Down where it's wetter.
Yeah, I was playing some Studio Ghibli stuff in the TAD room.
You played Spirited Away, and Alan Taffel was in the room. And Alan Taffel goes, I love this movie. And he was like in it. And I think even what's his name, Shinji-san from TAD, he kind of like poked his head and he was like, he's playing some Joe Hisaishi in there? Like, what's going on in there? Like, that was so cool. That was a cool one. Alan Taffel was from Absolute Sound. Yeah, he was like, I love this movie.
Yeah, speaking of the of test tracks that we request to play, Marc Phillips, Austin, we've talked about this on many other shows, how he likes to play Chocolate Chip Trip by Tool. He loves it. That's his song. He likes to play it at the shows. And it kind of became a thing a little bit. A couple shows he requested enough times, other people heard it, and he started hearing it in rooms. Like, it became this, like, in real life viral moment where people heard it and played it, whatever. So I said to myself, as you guys who listen to the show and my friends here know, my wife is a big Swiftie, so I had said, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to choose a Taylor Swift track. It's a little bit awkward, but there's got to be a good audiophile one in there. So this one I listened to a bunch of stuff with her, against my free will. No, I volunteered. But Folklore, yeah, because those ones are, so legitimately, it's cut down a little bit. Maybe the production's not, it's got high production, but it's not as, like, flashy, right?
John Atkinson loves that album.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, he wrote about it in a couple of his reviews.
So the one I selected was Cardigan, all right? So it's the second track off of Folklore, and I started playing it. It did not catch on, but something really interesting happened. And I don't know if you guys are going to believe this. The second room I did it in, I was speaking with the guy who was running the room, and a person turned to me and goes, "Sure you don't want to play Chocolate Chip Trick?" Heard my voice and recognized my voice, and immediately was like, "Where's Chocolate Chip Trip, bro?" And I was like, oh, that's a moment. I'm trying to start something new, and Marc won't leave me alone. He's not even here.
From Tool to Taylor Swift.
That's right.
Grover and I, mostly Grover, but he and I kind of have this, what we call a speaker torture test playlist that we've kind of picked select tracks, and I usually try to, when I can remember what's on the playlist, pull something off of that, just because it is a bit challenging, but it kind of gives the speaker an opportunity to shine or show some shortcomings. So yeah, it's certainly not Chocolate Chip Trip.
The one that I hear that I don't know if I always agree with is I hear Billie Jean. And sometimes, to me, I don't think that treble in the recording is really that great.
Here's the thing. Let me explain this. Thriller and Off the Wall are two of the most informative albums you can listen to. The vinyl is very different from the digital. But if you listen to the digital, the thing about the vinyl is the vinyl has a little more low end on both of those albums. When you listen to the digital, those albums should both sound a little thin in the bass. So, like, if you get those and they sound like they have good bass, it's either a weird remaster or they're playing the original digital and it's too much low end. And there's a weird particular kind of, like, analog-y thinness that they have, the digital transfers. And so, like, if I listen to something off the wall or, like, some of the first cuts off a Thriller, I'm not listening for it to actually sound perfectly balanced. A speaker with a flat frequency response should sound a little thin in the low end on those tracks. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it. I'm just saying, like, those tracks aren't very high resolution in the digital versions, but sometimes people listen because, like, the groove should still have a sense of timing, even if the low end isn't quite as punchy as a modern digital thing would be.
So we're not always showcasing necessarily the most perfect tracks or the most perfect audiophile tracks, but it's things that we know to look for.
And just for those who come to the shows, you don't have to rely on everybody else's stuff. You can take your stuff in and just play whatever, or try to get it played as much as you want, just as long as you're familiar with it. But try to make it sound as good as possible, because I have been in rooms before where a person's like, hey, I'm like, what is this track? It's not a very good cut. And they'll be like, oh, this guy brought it in and you had to hear it, but, you know, teach his own.
A couple of years ago, a guy came in, 17, 18-year-old, right, with a copy of Ride the Lightning.
Wow.
to listen to on the $320,000 pair of speakers. He's like, this is the track I want to listen to on vinyl. Sure, the guy who was running the room said, you know, all right, but if it's bad, we're turning it off. The whole room played the whole track through. Everybody got into it. Your reference tracks are your reference tracks, and we all have our own because we all listen for our own stuff in them. A lot of mine are from pro and stuff, and they're weird in a hi-fi room, but I know what they're supposed to sound like. So
Jameson always blasts like Bloodcore and, you know, Death Scan and Polyphia and stuff like that. So
Polyphia is actually one of our.
I have heard a lot of people playing Polyphia actually at this show, which is cool. One of the things that I love about hi-fi, it activates a different kind of sense memory than visual. Like, we're so visual. We have to look at screens all day. We look at stuff all day. We're very visual, and there are moments in my life where I'm like, you really remember what music you're listening to. You're like, oh, like that breakup or that hard time in my life or when I was in college or whatever. Like, it's burned in your brain what you were listening to, like the month, sometimes the week, sometimes the day or time. And so for me, the best hi-fi experiences are those ones that kind of like inscribe themselves in my sense memory, you know? And that is part of, I think, the high that we're chasing.
Music is definitely a mnemonic, and our memories auditorily function much better than they do visually. There's no doubt of that.
These are emotion engines that we are listening to, right? They're here to elicit a response, and that previous experience is part of that.
And it can be anything. It can be like weird music or music that sometimes music you didn't expect gets you in a certain way, right? Perfectly recorded, perfectly, sometimes it's just whatever happened to hit for whatever reason in that way. And sometimes those are the most fun because we all have that thing where like we get into a track and we listen to it like 500 times a day for like 3 weeks. And then we're like, oh, we sucked all the meaning out like a vampire. And now you can't listen to it. And then like a year or two later, you hear the song, you're like, oh, I can kind of listen to this song again.
I think Bon Jovi is about 12.
Well, yeah, but you take naps to Led Zeppelin, so you're not allowed to talk.
I accidentally brought a Yanni CD that, and one of it was in my bin in here, and one of the guys grabbed it to do it as a test track. Somebody asked to hear the CD player, so he just grabbed it. And I said, sorry, somebody playing Yanni's first album in here? What is happening? And it was my favorite CD when I was in elementary school. And it just happened to get tossed in the box. But it was amazing. The moment it came back to me, I was like, oh, I'm 8 and I'm reading The Giver again. And I'm like, that's what's going on. It was really cool.
Poi Dog Pondering is that for me. I was dancing and Talking Heads too. It's just very soulful. I remember dancing in diapers to like Stevie Wonder and Talking Heads, and it just like Stevie. I put on Stevie and I know it's not the most like audiophile music, but man, any of those songs off of like Songs in the Key of Life, that just like puts me back. And if the speakers put me in the emotional realm, I'm like, it's in the right place. And if it's like I'm listening, I'm like, I somehow can't groove into it. I have that music so on speed dial that it's like I know something's not working. It's not even an audiophile technical way of listening. It's just knowing that something's right or wrong. Yeah,
conveying the groove and really bringing you in emotionally. It doesn't distill down to a distortion or a certain measurement or whatever. There's a soul to the electronics, and measurements are not there to be able to quantify that yet.
I don't carry around anything to measure the room or what we're listening to. It's all about what you hear and how it makes you feel.
A really good friend of mine who's a brilliant engineer, he said, the measurements really only tell you when something is wrong. He's like, certain things like noise, obviously if it's negative 20 dB noise, it's super noisy, you can't listen to it. It's like, so there are obvious things that we like, or if the distortion is 25% THD at 1 watt for a 100 watt amplifier, he's like, it's not going to work, it's clipping, right? He said, but beyond he's like, the measurements really only tell you when something's wrong. They don't always really elucidate why something sounds the way it does. And even sometimes the things we think, he's like, people talk about slew clipping. He's like, is it different because the thing that you changed to change the slew clipping is different, or is it different because the slew clipping is different? He's like, you don't know, because now you changed a bunch of parts, and now you have the slew clipping different. He's like, are the parts different, or is the slew clipping different? Is it the parts different, or the rise time is different? He's like, you don't know which is which, right? But you know that it's different. He's like, so you do what sounds good. He said, but the measurements, they can only guide you to a certain point, which I thought was a very interesting take on it. I hadn't thought about it that way, even though I have some technical background. It was like, oh, that's an interesting. He also says, if the mid-range isn't good, I kind of don't really care what the bass and the treble are like. Or I have a hard time, which is an interesting take as well.
That is an interesting take. Usually people build their mixes from the top or the bottom.
Yeah, but he was like,
start
if
in the middle and go out.
The mid-range isn't at least decent, I can't do anything else. It's hard for me to vibe into it. So
Donut mix,
yeah. They take the centers out of the holes out of the guitars. Do you know where you go buy all the guitar holes? Guitar center.
I'll take it, dude. Oh man, I'll take it. I love it. So, in terms of kind of more a technical look at two things that I pulled from my experience so far, I'd love to get your guys' reaction on. One, this show, among others, I think this is probably the most that has happened now. I'm seeing a ton of these gallium nitride amplifiers come out. And so there's more than one. It used to be there's only AGD was one of the first guys to come out. He put it in a tube. It sounds great. It's a fun little thing. It's Class D. It's in a glass tube. And he took that idea. But now I'm seeing more and more people say, hey, I got an audiophile amplifier here, and it's this GaN. And to which I said, so it's Class D. And 2 people out of the 3 said, no, it's not Class D. And so finally I had to go to a third person. So I ended up talking to this guy from MyTech, Mikal is his name. And he's a very smart gentleman, Polish. And he was like, it is totally Class D, but it's the faster Class D, which is essentially a very simplified way of thinking about it, but it applies to the charging units too. It's a faster way to charge. It's a faster way to do the D switching. But my question is what do you guys think about the GaN? Have you heard any here? And do you think that this industry is starting to validate it, or is it very much like we are not ready to accept a new topology outside of A++?
There's been a number of brands that are just doing Class D in general, and some of them are very reputable. I mean, Tidal's doing Class D, TAD was doing Class D. Grover didn't even know it was Class D until I told him. Now, the gain stage parts, I can't really speak to. I did poke my head into the AGD room, and it sounded okay. It sounded okay. So I don't know what the secret sauce is. If some people can get Class D to sound acceptable or good, or what their design intentions are on why they've gone to Class D. I can understand the merits of being able to run it cooler and have better power and things like that. But where does that emotional response and that emotional capture come in, and why Class D would accommodate that? But some people are doing it successfully.
He definitely did say it's like a lot of things, all about implementation. It's very difficult, he said. So we have like this tried and true Class A, you can buy whatever. There's a lot of designs out there. It's been fully explored. This is a new thing. And he just said, gave a warning, keep an eye out, because this shit is hard to program. It's hard to do correctly. And so you're going to see, as if it indeed is the future that we're kind of staring at, you're going to see a lot of poor executions and probably some good ones, but it's not an easy path compared to what we've already trod with the other classifications.
I wouldn't say that Class D is
No, the gallium nitrate is the thing. Not Class D, but the GaN is what he's talking about.
But it's strange. I mean, Class D came out in the early 90s, as I recall, maybe late 80s, and people have still been trying to perfect it, and here it is 30 plus years later. Some of these new topologies, I think, take a long time for somebody to figure it out, whether it's a materials thing or whether it's just devoting the time and the resources into making it good.
Yeah.
So maybe it's starting to mature a little bit, but I'll let the other guys weigh in and see.
And I also appreciate your skepticism. It's like, it's been around, it's never sounded great, and they have tried to make it sound good for how many years? But I don't think it sounds terrible. Like I said, I'm not naysaying the topology. I'm just saying that there's room for growth yet, and maybe this is the path, or maybe it's just, marketing fluff. But the stuff I've heard has been pretty good, and I'm hopeful that we, if nothing else, could get better sound in smaller areas with less heat. Because Class A, as you guys all know, is like so elusive for those reasons. For us to bring it down to a more consumer level would mean better sound for all, at least in my mind. I don't know if you guys have a reaction to that. Anything, Grover?
So how much time you got? All right, here's what I'll say. I'm going to try not to put you all to sleep. The history of big research money in audio has been one that drives towards efficiency and cost. Sound quality is not a factor of interest to them. Back in the 20s and 30s, they actually weren't even really interested in the quality as we think of it as of audio reproduction. What they were interested in was reproduction of the human voice for telephony. So they actually, the original THD plus noise spec is sourced from, we do it very differently now, but it's sourced from telephone specs, and it was essentially intelligibility. Like, how low can you get the noise and how clear can you get the mid-range so you can understand someone's voice coming through a telephone line. And the history of the anode, the triode, the diode, moving on to the transistor, all of it has been in pursuit of greater efficiency and lower cost. So our metric of audio quality is not of interest to people who spend significant amounts of money. And as audio hobbyists and manufacturers, we are completely beholden. There is no audio company on earth that produces audiophile equipment as its main business that can produce transistors in any quantity of note. It's just not. Doesn't happen. The vast majority of the tube companies, they make tubes for guitar amps or space applications, aerospace, right? Like, we are a tiny, minuscule little fraction even of tubes. We are an even smaller, more minuscule fraction of transistors. Nobody is interested in what we're doing.
We're more of an annoyance than a business segment.
We have to make do. Exactly. We have to make do with parts which are not designed for us. They are not designed with audio quality in mind. The transistor dies are not cut to be any sort of special pattern we don't care. They don't care about that. So, understanding all that, gallium nitride. The only reason to use a gallium nitride transistor is because it can switch faster. So you switching faster, the idea is the faster switching is a higher frequency, you can get the noise more out of band, because the problem with Class D, everybody acts like it's some great mystery. The thing is, nobody's ever really tried to build a Class D amp with anything other than modules generally. Like, nobody builds their own Class D amps. Maybe some people have tried, but it's not really a thing. Class D, the concept goes, carrier signal noise from the switching gets into the audio band. Now you have noise, now you have distortion, no good. Try and get out of the band. Some people use carrier signals up higher. David Burning was like, we can put it into a transformer and use tubes, and there's all these different ways of dealing with it. Gallium nitride's brute force. It says, we're going to move that switching frequency up higher, switch faster, and potentially, theoretically, we can switch fast enough that you don't hear it anymore. That distortion that you hear in Class D in the mid-range and top end, where you're like, there's some steely, unpleasant character to the sound, or a sort of a plasticky sheen to the sound, that's essentially what you're hearing. That's switching noise, right? That's the character of switching noise. Gallium nitride tends to do that faster. Purify from Bruno Putzis, which is a new topology, has some very fancy, complicated math and topology that tries to do, ultimately, I think something interesting that's not been done, or I have not seen done, is like, what if you tried to do a lower feedback Class D? Because you have to use a lot of feedback to correct some of the errors you get in Class D. It's like, well, what if you were able to use gallium nitride and then you could lower your overall loop feedback in a Class D amp and use more local feedback and try and get the timing a little better and get the harmonic structure a little nicer, right? What if you could build I don't know, what would it look like to build sort of a switch mode power supply that could work with tubes that had the switching noise and character low enough that it wouldn't sort of sound really, because you generally can't use as much switch mode power supplies with tubes because they pick up RF a lot, right? And they're very sensitive to the switching noise. So these are interesting questions. I hope that we're going to see more creativity going forward with it. That it's like, hey, how can we use these things in interesting and improved ways? Right now, what we're seeing a lot of is people implementing modules, and that's kind of step one. We're learning our building blocks. We're learning the alphabet again. The vast majority of engineers in audio are not highly experienced with digital and switching topologies, and they're complicated. You know, in the way that transistors don't have as much to do with tubes, right? They're different kinds of circuits. Class D is kind of a different language from your typical Class AB amp. It goes into realms that your average audiophile EE may not be familiar with, you know, and that's not a dig on their skills. It's just a different way of thinking. So I think that there's a lot of potential. I heard some Purify amps that came out when those boards first launched, and I didn't think they sounded, it was like, man, these are a little better, but they don't sound good. But I recently heard some inexpensive, like $1,200 a pair monoblock Purify amps that I was like, these sound fantastic, right? On my 100 dB efficient horn-loaded speakers at home that I normally use an 8-watt tube amp with, 300 beat, right? And I was like, these Class D amps actually sound like nice on these horns, right? So that was impressive. And then there's a couple of other brands that use GaNFET or Purify, and the implementation around that has to be good. These are not just cheap things to throw in to save costs, like, because the Purify and the GaNFET boards, they're not cheap, they're expensive. So treating them nicely, you know, put a tube buffer in front, put a solid state nice BJT in front, see what they sound like, see what you can get out of them. So I think the building blocks have offered some interesting things. I think the quality is better. I hear a lot less of that sort of nasty distortion that I've heard sometimes with Class D in the new Purify and the new GaNFET modules. I think there's promise. On the one hand, you know, are we getting greater efficiency? Can we build cheaper things? But also some people have demonstrated you can build some very expensive things that actually sound pretty impressive. I'm a tube fan, so like I'm all tube at home. There's no transistors in my signal chain. So you kind of know where I stand from what I choose to spend my money on. But I do think, especially like in Europe, power consumption's a big thing, heat's a big thing, integrated products are a big thing, right? Fitting all these parts into one chassis and the space issue. They've actually been a little bit more forward-looking to it than North America has been. And I think there's promise. So far, though, I've never had a moment with Class D where the music was imprinted on my sense memory. And that's kind of my schlocky little standard that I'm holding it to. I think it'll get a lot better in the next 5 to 10 years. I think it'll get a lot better.
Do you think that the CD is having a revival. So one of the other thing is Cord came out with a brand new CD player a long time ago, being like 3 years ago, and now I'm seeing more and more CD players being introduced. We saw Shit Audio do their Transport, which did not do SA-CD for the record. It only does CD. Bracasti has a new CD player that does do SA-CD that just came out for like around 10 Gs. So I'm wondering, are we in the middle of a CD revival? Are all those children of the 90s saying, I got this collection, I just don't want to give it up? Because Grover's giving me a face right now, but again, he wasn't there. He didn't know the joy
That's what I'm saying.
of crystal cases lined up, bro.
A little. I do remember Tower Records. I'm not allowed to say anything during this conversation, though.
Did you have like a car full of CDs that you had burned yourself or you were destroying by laying on seats?
I did have CDs I burned myself, but I was too young to have a car at the point.
Oh, okay. We used to play, none of mine were labeled, so we used to just play CD roulette where you just throw something in and be like...
I'm probably the only one that's old enough to really have a strong opinion on the whole CD thing, because I remember when CDs were first introduced. And I don't get it. I don't get it whatsoever. There are, from a technical standpoint, there are a lot of limitations of Redbook CD, and if we can get either hard drive files, WAV files, FLAC, whatever, that are 24-bit, 92K, whatever, outside of DVD audio, that's the only thing that you can really use that even gets close to that resolution, which is not a popular media, and you don't see a big glut of DVD audio starting to hit the market, regardless of what price point. I think that, for me, being kind of a digital person, I'm just getting into vinyl now. So I've been digital like my whole audio career for the most part, or audio hobby life. And I love hard drive and streaming and all that kind of stuff. The convenience is there, the portability is there, and the just breadth of how much music consumption I can touch is 100 times more than dealing with CDs.
And I'm with you on that. I came from the pro side. People are saying, well, there's a CD player, right? I can get a higher resolution stream. I can get a better controlled stream than a CD. It's not on something that's going to get scratched lightly and have optical inclusions that are going to cause problems. And I did not understand. And it wasn't until I was in Munich this year that I finally said, I found a reason to have some CDs. I met a guy who came into the room and used to do French radio stations. Super insanely nice gentleman named Marc, who showed up with like 1,700 songs, but he had them all burned on CDs. That's how he moved his stuff around. He also had a hard drive, but he preferred the tactile and the use of CDs from his past. So he would give me, he'd play something, like, oh my God, I have to have this. How can I have this? And he would tell me who did it. And these are self-released. They're not available on streaming. They're not on labels. And so, yeah, I had to stop listening to him because it cost me way too much money to be in the room when he was around. Like, I ended up buying like 15, 20 CDs off of Discogs that were imported from Romania and Italy. Because
But did you immediately go rip them to your hard drive and put the CDs away?
Yes.
There you go.
But the CDs are here because sometimes people want to hear an esoteric CD player.
And there's music,
CX
just
player.
like on vinyl. There's stuff on vinyl that you cannot get digitally.
Absolutely, yes.
That's a very good point, too.
And so, there's a couple of CDs that we have that are some of our favorite music, and it is just literally not available anywhere else.
And unique pressings when it comes to vinyl, right? You've got, it's this pressing versus that pressing, but there's CD releases too the same way.
But that's not inherent to the format. That's just inherent to this was released at this time and this was the technology that was available.
By modern standards, the format is almost inherently flawed. Like, you can do better.
Can I play devil's advocate here for a second? I'm not wearing enough eyeliner to... I'm going to my room already, Dad. I'm not like other girls. CDs are the only music format we have had that give power to the people. You can't press vinyl at home. You can't you can make music in a DAW and put it on a hard drive, but like that hard drive dies or that streaming service closes down and you don't have that music anymore, you don't have it. Even cassettes, you really can't burn cassettes at home. CDs, anybody can go buy some CDs online, get a little Darth Vader CD player for $35 on Amazon, and they can go and they say, I love this music, I can burn it, I can burn my own music to CD, I can hand it to someone, they can put it in their thing and then play it, and they can pop it out and share it with someone. That was the only format we ever had that was commercial, where the people who listened, the audience, had a physical artifact of the music and could actually replicate and share and play that music and take it with them. And it was better than hard drives because you need a computer to use a hard drive. You don't need a hard drive.
I don't know, man. I still have my iPod Classic.
I'm just saying.
You know, what about the mini disc, though? I had a mini disc player. You guys remember the mini disc?
I do remember the mini disc.
I'm going to put my eyeshadow on now. There's a whole... You listen to emo or punk music from 95 up until about 2008, you cannot get that shit on streaming. Does not exist. There is a huge catalog of CD that never existed on streaming. And...
There's a huge catalog of like underground EDM in the same vein.
Right. And one can also argue from a format standpoint, like, we're better off now that we have 16-bit minimum streaming, but ultimately the master and the mix are what determines it. If you have a crappy master, it's going to sound bad on CD, it's going to sound bad on streaming, and it's probably not going to sound that much better on vinyl.
I bought a Bob Marley DVD audio, and I played it, and I'm like, why do I need to hear tape hiss and crackle and all sorts of artifacts in 24-bit? This is ridiculous.
I bought a very prominent pop singer's vinyl recording. I was like, oh, this is going to be great. It's terrible. It's terrible recording, terrible pressing.
Was it Adele?
Yes, it was.
The flip side of that being that pretty much all music before 1992, you just haven't heard if you haven't heard it on vinyl. I'm going to go out and say that. Most of the digital transfers suck.
Yeah, especially at that vintage. It was terrible.
Like, Nat King Cole's good, and there's like maybe some Sinatra that's okay, like big stuff. Everything else, dookie.
No, that was going back to the era where they thought bits were bits and it didn't matter.
That album's great.
There you go.
Okay. Give or take a few years.
Seriously, though, there was about a 10-year period where, in the infancy of digital, at least as a consumer, not necessarily in the recording industry, the mastering houses, they just pump stuff out and they would change the mixes and they do all sorts of just awful things to the music. And as the end consumer, you had no idea. And, you're listening to on, a portable CD player with some crappy headphones or something, and you didn't really notice. But then you toss in your Van Halen 1984 CD on your HiFi rig, and you're like, this sounds like trash. But then people are like, oh, no, that album sounds awesome on vinyl. Okay, like, why is it different?
The remasters for Led Zeppelin, they were like these digital tracks that were out there, like the remaster for one of the many remasters for all the albums. I'm like, these sound terrible. I couldn't believe it because they were selling it as it sounds better. But the reality, to at least my experience, they sounded worse. I was like, this is very deceptive, folks.
The recordings on those were awful, to say the least. The music was great, but the recordings were awful.
The original vinyl of that, it was awful in a way that was tolerable, or it was awful in a way that was an artifact of what the original thing is. Like, it was fun awful, right? Whereas, like, once you do a bad digital transfer and it's gone through, like, 15 digital transfers and it's gone through over-loudinating and loudness wars have won, all that kind of stuff, it doesn't sound trashy in a fun way anymore. Or, like, old Stevie Wonder. Old Stevie Wonder, it's all redlining and it's pegged on the meters, and it's the dirtball. But you listen to it on vinyl, and you're like, oh my god, even a scratched up vinyl, you're like, there's so much vibe and so much harmonic structure. Then you listen to like remastered ultra digital deluxe whatever, and you're like, man, it just sounds like someone slapping a tin can with a fish. There's like no soul.
Yeah, Jefferson Airplane sounds like that to me. The vinyls, doesn't matter how bad the vinyl sounds.
It's like someone tapping on the glass at the aquarium.
Yeah.
Best of show. Any highlights for you, Greg? And then your nomination for best of show. But let's talk about highlights and then the crown jewel.
Highlights. The Aquara room with the big VRCs. I walked in and they were playing Night on Bald Mountain. And it's really impressive to have that much dynamic range on that system to really play as loud as you could possibly want it and as quiet as you could possibly hear it in the same track with never touching the volume control knob and just having that presence in the system. So that was impressive. I really like that. The diptyque with the soul notes, that room sounded fantastic. And to hear a magnaplanar electrostatic-y type of a speaker, usually they have a fair amount of shortcomings that are obvious. And this one just checked the boxes for me. And it was just like, it was soulful, and I enjoyed it, and I just wanted to sit there and just listen. So that was a highlight. The Vandersteen, the Now Listen Here Vandersteen room with the new Rega Naya turntable was a bit of a pleasant surprise. Normally, Vandersteen has always got really excellent bass, but I felt that the mid-range and the tweeter was a little uncharacteristic of the warmth that you normally listen to with Vandersteen. And not only that, they had an awesome playlist. So they were playing some really fun tunes in there as well.
They played some Van Morrison live deep cut. I was like losing my mind. I was like, this sounds so good. They were playing cool music in that room. And it was like, it sounded good. It sounded good.
Yeah, it was just really, really pleasing.
Dude, those Van Morrison deep cuts too. I've seen stuff with live where he's just like beep bop doo bop skip it up doo bop 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 for like ever, yeah.
Ski up 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 up.
And then I've recently done a review on the Triangle Antols, and that speaker in that room, the 40th anniversary, the smaller Antols, sounded just like they were in my living room. So I felt that room was pretty well done. Probably a bit of a sleeper. But those were probably the majority of the rooms, but the one that took the cake for me was Doug White's room with the title. The new G3 Contra just really resonated with me. It was dynamic, and it had some soul, and the imaging was fantastic, and it was just, I could sit and listen to that room all day. So I think that's probably my best show.
Nice. Grover, highlights and then the crown jewel for you?
Yeah, so my top highlight was there's a little bakery across the street called T-Mania, T-E-A Mania. It's like an Asian European bakery cafe. They got these roast duck buns that are like, ooh baby, so good. I'd sell my left toe for that duck bun. That was so good. And they had little natas and so much. Everyone goes to the Silver Diner. And I've been to the Silver Diner about 9,000 times in my life at this point. But like T-Mania, right next to the little Silver Diner, so good. So good. Doesn't open until 9:30. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's good. Oh, yeah, you meant the calf rooms. Okay. I got to say, yeah, Doug White is just, that man is so consistent. He just shows up and put on a damn good room every time. The little title intro with the new Contrivas, it was just like, yeah. Just classy, wide bandwidth, dynamic, nice tone. Like, it's just great. It's just good stuff. I was very impressed by both von Schweiker rooms, actually. So they're playing one of the Endeavor speakers in the big room instead of the big Ultra Series stuff. And I was like, this is cool. We got bass. We got scale like the big speakers. But, like, I don't know. Kind of does something in the mid-range for me that is different from the big speakers. I'm sure some people like the big speakers better, but I was kind of, there was some guitar track playing in there when I went in there, and I was vibing out. It was like some flamenco bouncy guitar thing. I also have to point out GTT Audio Room, which again, Class D with those speakers. They played some Take 5 cover by the Helga Leon Trio, which was really cool. I've never heard Take 5. It was a little bit kind of, I won't say avant-garde exactly, but it was a really cool cover of Take 5 that I have not heard before that I really enjoyed. Little vivid speakers that kind of look like Whipped Cream or the aliens from Fifth Element, and they had some dynamics. They were like pumping. Oh, Treehouse was kind of cool.
Treehouse was cool, yeah.
This stuff is always some of the prettiest stuff.
Beautiful. He had the best lighting. The speakers are gorgeous. The setup is all beautiful, and like it's got dynamics. It's like a classic tone, but it's not constricted bandwidth. Like it's wide bandwidth. It's actually pretty clean. It's got a certain vintage vibe to it. There's a harmonic structure to things, but like it's cleaner. It's got deep bass. The bass I thought was quite tight. He's got a new speaker with a different bass driver, and the bass is very fast on it, and it's really fast and controlled, and I thought it was really nice. And also just, I had fun photographing that room. Just beautiful.
It's just a beautiful
speaker.
space to be in.
So pretty.
And he has like I think they call it like a live edge on the edge of the baffle there.
Yeah, he did like an acrylic pour with like multiple tree stumps kind of arranged in the baffle.
A really sweet table. Have you seen those live edge tables? And they put the acrylic in it just like that. He did a fantastic job with it. Yeah,
super gorgeous. Most of the big rooms on the first floor sounded good. The core room sounded good. The Karma Conrad Johnson room I thought sounded Sounded nice. VSA, Von Schweikert room with Gary Leeds from Hear This. And he had Westminster with Lampezator and Small Green Computer or Tyco or something like that. Yeah, Small Green. And that room was like, I've heard those Westminsters a couple times now. Those are cool little amps, you know? Those are big VR 55s were in that room, I think it was. VR 55 Mark IIs. And those little Westminster Class A amps were like pumping on them. That room was cool. And they were playing nice music too. They were playing like, some lady walked in, she's like, can we hear some Elvis? And they played like Burning Love or something like that. And she was like dancing around to that. I was like, this is so badass. This is awesome.
I really like the Vandersteen room as well. Like I said, sat in that one for a while. The Diptyque room was also very, very nice to hang out in. Just down the hall from that, the Acoustic Energy room, they have their new like flagship, and that was fantastic to listen to. Really a lot of fun. The Bay-Z room. So,
what room is that?
833.
I need to go check that out.
So
I think I missed that.
These giant C-shaped carbon fiber tube speakers. So people say they look like carabiners or paper clips. They're genuinely impressive in there. You move around the room and they're 6 feet tall. They disappeared in the space. And then as you walked around and got out of the center seat, they still weren't there. And it was kind of creepy, and had VAC amps and esoteric CD player and an R-ender, and they were really, really cool. Not necessarily the most hi-fi, but kind of a raucous good time. I was just looking up at their band, all the Triangle Art guys have these massive wooden horns, and they're just a big party kind of sounding. It's party speakers. In the same vein, Oz brought some giant horns, the stuff that you only see at, like, in Munich, some really avant-garde art-looking horn pieces. If they were just turned down slightly, they would have been even better.
That's actually kind of an interesting thing. Some rooms just feel that if it's not 96 decibels, it's not loud enough.
I agree with that.
Or 104. Can I go on a short rant? I promise it's short. Quiet listening, like, we don't have any skills we have to cultivate in audiophilia, right? Quiet listening is a skill to cultivate in audiophilia. Because what happens when you listen quietly is, first of all, you have to let your brain adjust a little to the slightly different frequency response, Fletcher-Munson curves and all that. But what happens is you have to lean into the music. One of my music theory teachers called it the difference between snorkeling and scuba diving, which, Marc, you'll know because you dive too, right? When you scuba dive, you go deep. So when the music is just quiet enough that it's like sort of on the edge of your perception, right, one notch higher or about there, you have to listen in. And when you hear those little ASMR moments that we listen for as audio, a little tinkly, like, ooh, a little bell or a little something that's like ear candy, you listen and you go, ooh, I want more of that. Instead of reaching for the volume knob, just listen in deeper. And you will get so zoned into the music. It is easier to have a deeper experience when you really zone in with quiet listening. And sometimes I'll just like turn all the lights in my house off. I'll like grab a pillow, I'll just lie down on my couch, and I'll turn the stereo on like just loud enough to barely hear it, and like listen to my favorite like tracks and just like zone deeply in. And you'll kind of get into like a focus state where like the music will start to sound louder even though it's not really, because your hearing is sensitive. And when you turn the stereo off, you'll notice you just hear more stuff. You hear like just the noises in the room more, and you're like very attuned, and it's kind of like a sensory reset kind of.
There's a concept of, I'm not trying to say that anybody here is doing that. Let me be 100% clear. There's a concept of covering up bad with loud.
Music has and it might be a little bit of a range, but there's a volume that music sounds best. And it doesn't necessarily have to be at the level that it was actually played at, but it's going to be somewhere in that vein. If something that's like hardcore loud music is played too softly, it just doesn't sound right. And like a nice sweet chamber music played at obscene levels is not going to sound right. There's like this kind of spot where music sounds best based on how it was performed. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah. We have the capacity for effectively infinite volume, right? We can get this stuff loud enough that it will physically harm us. There's no reason to do that. One of the things I listen to when I try to listen to new speakers and equipment for the first time is at low level, right? It should still have dynamics. It should still have impact at a low level. Because if you don't have it there, again, you're turning it up. You're just turning up something, looking for something that you're not going to find.
I think I got some good fun out of the Brocasti room. They had some good stuff in there. Also, Tidal speakers in that room on the smaller side. For a fun room, I did have a good time in the zoo room. They're blasting. They have a little DJ booth set up on the side. Sometimes they pull out a Neve console, so they're like on, they do a little on the production side, and they have 2 turntables and a microphone capture a little bit more solidly in there, and then like a fun party vibe. I think the MyTech room kind of caught me off guard a little bit too. He's been working on some stuff, and he had some new prototype speakers behind the curtain there that he wasn't ready to show. They didn't have face plates and this thing, but it was the GaN stuff that I had spoke to him about. And he's working with some really cool tools back there. So I had a very fun time listening in that room as well. I kind of like the new quads. Did you guys get a chance to check out, I think it's Roy Yacht Audio quad with another one of these GaN amplifiers called Java HiFi. They had a pretty good sound, and I think that the bass, I'm pretty sure there's a dynamic driver snuggled away in there somewhere, but it sounded good. So that was like a fun surprise. So I'll give that my oh.
Are you a quad convert now?
Maybe. I don't know. Those things are so big. The problem is they wouldn't fit in my room. My wife would not allow me to have them. They're very wide speakers, so it's a bit of a thing. Just like I'm sure the Magnepans out there that I've never really fully experienced either are amazing when they're really big, but I'll never really get the chance because that's a tough speaker for me to sell in.
Caution, wide load.
Well, guys, thank you so much for coming on the show. Grover, Graig, Marc. Great fun show. It's been fun having you guys on today.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks,
Brian. It's been great.
The Occasional Podcast is a production of the Part-Time Audiophile Network, which includes parttimeaudiophile.com, The Occasional Magazine, the PTA Newsletter, and audiohead.com. You can stay in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. The Occasional Podcast is produced and hosted by Brian Hunter, executive produced by Scott Hall at PTA Productions. The Occasional Podcast and its original associated music is monitored, mixed, and mastered on the Focal Trio 6 BE studio monitors. If you haven't already, please subscribe to The Occasional Podcast on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.